Do- Good afternoon and welcome to AM News Network presents Summary Judgment with Rachel Baird, and standing in for Ed Peruta today.
Sitting in. Yeah.
Sitting in is Dan Lynch. There may be some glitches in the show because Ed's not here, and we're doing our best without him, right, Dan?
He's probably watching.
He's probably watching right now.
He'll call in with a critique or two.
Yeah, that makes us a little nervous too. So always have to turn that down. But Dan's here today to discuss some really interesting issues, right?
I am?
I don't want to set expectations too high. First of all, though, I want to congratulate you on a victory that you had this week.
Oh,
and this is a letter from the City of Boston, Office of the Parking Clerk, Room 224, Boston City Hall, Boston, Massachusetts. Dear Sir or Madam, the Office of the Parking Clerk has reviewed your dispute and has administratively dismissed violation number. For privacy purposes, I won't give out the actual number, Dan. We believe that the violation was issued in accordance with whatever and was validly issued. Oh, they're covering their ass. I didn't see that before.
Yes.
Any other similarly issued violations will not be dismissed and will require you to appeal in person. So it's almost like you've been given a strike against you, and if you do it again, then that's it. Okay.
I got a kick out of it when I read the letter because, the evidence was overwhelming. I walked this as, I can't remember the date now, but a month or so ago when I was up in Boston. And, there's on Massachusetts Avenue, right across from the Christian Science Monitor Building. For those who know the Boston area, it's a pretty busy thoroughfare. But parking is allowed. Metered parking is allowed during the day. I think it's 2-hour max. But in the evenings, from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. the following morning, you can park your car there, which is really convenient because I was staying with a college roommate who lives right on that street. And so I've been there.
No time limitation between 8 p.m. and 8 a.m. and no charge.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So and the meters, and they have the digital meters with kind of multiple readouts depending on the situation. And there's other there's other issues obviously that are overriding things like if there's a snow emergency or whatever. There's various signs parked. But in any case, I go waltzing out to my car one morning at 7:45 or whatever time it was to knowing full well that I got to move the car before 8 o'clock. And
so you set your alarm, you planned ahead to go out there and move it in accordance with the law.
Yeah, and there's a ticket. And I was kind of stunned when I saw it because, I looked at, it was whatever, 10 of 8, and I thought, wait a minute, what's going on? And I started hunting around looking. The first thing, of course, these days, you pick up your phone, or at least I did. And, I took pictures. I started taking video. I shed the video from the meter showing that it was before 8 o'clock because I didn't even look at the ticket. But I'm just assuming, geez, they wrote me a ticket. It's not even 8 o'clock. And then, of course, when I picked up the ticket, it was a $90 ticket for street cleaning. And I thought, well, where's the sign that says street cleaning? Where's the meter tells you could park here? Everything says you could park here. And so then I walked all the way down the street. I can't even remember how many parking spaces I walked down. I think it was quite a ways. I think 14 or 18 spaces or something before I saw a sign that said, Thursday nights, it said Friday mornings, midnight to 7 a.m. You can't park there because street cleaning. And I thought, well, this is not fair because that sign, they shouldn't have had it, a couple hundred yards down the street. And I wrote him a letter, and of course I included, photos that I had taken, and I included, an aerial map from Google Earth to show precisely the various,
That's what you have to
do.
do.
There were 5 signposts in between where the car was parked and where the sign was that had altered other types of things talking about snow removal or just other ancillary things, but no reference. So plenty of opportunity for them to put. So I figured, you want to have a hearing? Let's have a hearing and we'll discuss this. But I think
you sent all your evidence in.
I sent it all and kind of said, look, folks, and I think they just saw it and thought, oh shoot, But I think my guess is the other folks who also had tickets were parked. I'm sure they just paid it.
Well, the next time you go up there, and there probably will be a next time, you should
Well, I'm
see.
not going to be. I mean, I'll make sure, obviously, on a Thursday night or something. If
Well, no, but check the signs to see if they've changed them.
oh, I didn't even think of that.
Yeah, they and if they haven't, then I think that's evidence that they don't mind being ambiguous, so they can ticket people and take advantage of the inconvenience of challenging it and just collect the money.
Well, I mean, I did think that. I think you remember. Remember when I was sending this letter in because I thought, oh, should I just pay this darn thing? I mean, half of me just didn't even want to be bothered, and I'm sure that's what many.
It's $90.
What many people do, but I didn't have the $90, so
Yeah.
I thought it's easier.
Well, no, $90 is a lot. It's
easier
not
to
like
pay for a stamp.
it's not like it was a $15 ticket or anything. Which still you did a good thing for everybody, because possibly they're going to change the signs now so it's clearer.
Well, I now that you mention it, I mean, I will. I mean, that's you generally stay in this. The same place every time I go up there, so I know the street pretty well. Now I know the signs and the posts very well.
Well, anybody who's watched me and Ed knows that we enjoy a good parking ticket story or a good motor vehicle infraction story. So
well, I'll keep it on my list, and we'll see where it goes. But I hadn't even thought about that. In the future, I'll check the post to see if maybe they make it less ambiguous.
in a lot of instances, when you sue someone, usually a municipality, for slipping on the ice, or I guess it could be an individual as well if they're supposed to keep their sidewalks clean or whatever, and then they change the circumstances after that to take away the hazard. You can't use that against them in court. In other words, if something's wrong and
Yeah.
then it's fixed, you can't say, well, obviously it was wrong then because they fixed it afterwards, because there's a public policy that we don't want to discourage people from fixing things that are hazardous. So what we'll do is we'll allow them to fix things that are hazardous, and then have that rule where you can't use it against that person afterwards.
Okay, so they can't say, oh, well, clearly you knew because 2 days later you scrambled over there
Exactly.
and filled in the hole, or.
And the parking ticket story really isn't in line with that. It's a different circumstance, but it did remind me of that issue, so I thought I'd bring it up before we get down to the real subjects that we're going to discuss today.
Yeah, that was a fun one. I kind of forgot about that,
Okay.
actually. Except,
Well, it's a win. A
So-
win is a win, and we'll
right.
take it.
Haven't had many of those.
I know. Small as it is sometimes,
Yeah.
it still boosts your spirits when you win something.
I found it interesting, as the U.S. Supreme Court was kind of scrambling to finish things up before they take the summer off or whatever they do.
They always issue the big ones at the end of the
You
session.
say big ones, big / controversial
Yes.
/ kick the can down the road decisions. What some of them?
I mean, Heller versus District of Columbia came down right at the end in 2008. I don't know if it was June 28th, June 27th, but basically right at the end. And then McDonald versus City of Chicago, the other big firearms case, came down at the end of the session in 2010. I don't know if it was the 28th or the 27th, but basically just at the end. So yeah, the big ones do come down.
Well, I think the first one that caught my attention in the last, week or so was the one dealing with the citizenship question on the U.S. Census.
And how did that come out?
And, well, it was a 5-4 opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And they basically said they can't ask the question. Well, I shouldn't say that they said they couldn't ask the question. Roberts wrote the opinion, and he said that the Commerce Department actually does have the authority to put the question on. What he didn't like is the reason that they gave, or what he said was that the justification for why they wanted to ask it didn't seem to match the record as to why they said they wanted to.
Oh.
And so it was kind of a weird, when you read through it, they still left the door open that, well, with the right reasoning, you could ask the question. It's certainly within the purview of the Commerce Department to add the question, but we're not buying your justification as to why you said you put it on. And it was almost like they were kind of challenging, like there was some kind of, they really went into detail about the record and all the things in the record, and it was clear that even before you gave us the reason that you had taken steps to add the question, and,
Mm-hmm. Well, it's important for people to remember that you have to make the record, with very few exceptions, in the trial court, because then when you appeal, you are stuck with whatever was done in the trial court. You can't keep bringing in new evidence, and usually you can't bring in new arguments as you go up, because then what happens is the trial court judge based their decision on the facts and the records and the arguments that you made. And then if you're going to go up on appeal and you're going to try to change the facts or change the arguments, it's not really fair to the trial court judge that, it's being changed. And sometimes I think they can remand it to give the judge a look at it. But other times they just say you're out of luck. You should have brought that up at the beginning.
In Connecticut, I mean, for somebody, as a non-attorney, and I never really spent much time even thinking about this stuff, but when I was reading about the history of the Connecticut Supreme Court, it really struck me that it used to actually be called the Supreme Court of Errors, and for a long time it was, and so I guess I just never had thought about that that the reviewing courts are just courts of error. Just check to see if there's a error at the lower court. But in any case, the reason that it kind of resonated with me was, in the world of genealogy, of course, we rely on census data to do a lot of the research and a lot of kind of tracking families and family groups and movements and stuff like that. And I just didn't understand what all the controversy was about, because they've been asking citizenship related questions since 1890 or 1880 or something like that. And so I thought, well, why is suddenly it a problem now that we want to ask a citizenship question? I mean, we have there's basic reasons why, and certainly there's precedent that we've asked it many times before, multiple questions, not just one.
Well, I would venture to say, for the same reason, all of a sudden there's a lot of outcry about detaining illegal immigrants when it's been going on, with Obama, with Clinton, with all the past administrations, it's been going on. But somehow when Donald Trump does it, it's wrong.
Right.
I think that's the answer to your question as well.
It is. I mean, in my mind it is anyway. It's just part of the over politicization of almost everything that happens. And
why don't you give the viewers? It's been a while since you've been on, and you have been on before and talked about genealogy a little bit. But just give a little idea of your background in genealogy, because what I like to say to clients when they're trying to get letters of recommendation or anything, in the letter of recommendation, have the person say who they are and how they know you, because then whoever they're writing the letter to can say, oh, this person's worth listening to. And if you kind of give an idea of your background in genealogy and some of these other census issues, people will have more of, there'll be more of, oh, that's why I should listen to Dan Lynch, because he's got a background in this and knows about this. As opposed to me, if I were to talk about it, it would basically just be something I read off the internet or I heard from Dan Lynch.
Well, I mean, the census is certainly wasn't created for genealogists, although we like to think that it was, in the world of genealogy. We're probably the most frequent users of historical census data, more so than most folks. I'd be curious to go into well, nowadays it's a little different anyhow, because so much of it's online. But back at the time when before the census data was available online for research, it'd be interesting to go to an archives and ask the record custodians, like who's coming in to access these records. Mm-hmm. And certainly I know historians or people who are working on historical novels or things, and I'm sure there's other reasons, but by and large I would bet that it's got to be 90% or more of the people trying to access the records were family historians. But I first got involved. I mean, I'm 57. I first got involved in, I'll say, genealogy research, before I even really knew the word genealogy, probably. It was just more family tree, kind of more, generic. I mean, I tend to soften it up and just use the words family history or family tree research, But when you're in your teens and, I can't pinpoint the one instance where the bug bit me. There were a few that I can remember even back in grade school, when I think every kid has at least some type of project in school where you have to work on, like, okay, what ethnicity is your family or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I know I actually love getting the phone calls from nieces or nephews, or when my daughters were growing up and they had, I think, as early as like second or third grade. And schools are different now in terms of how they do stuff, because I think there's so much sensitivity to, why are you asking my kid these questions? Mm-hmm. But it was not uncommon for folks to have like a Heritage Day or something like that, or certainly around St. Patrick's Day. Everybody's trying to figure out how they're Irish. But I got involved and intrigued very early on, and even through my high school days. And then as somebody who grew up in New England and cycled around a lot, not uncommon to stop in these historical cemeteries, which I fell in love with. And to this day, still anybody who cycles with me knows if we go by a cemetery more than once, I'm going to stop, and kind of check it out and just kind of in my mind say, okay, I know kind of the rough family names that are in there. But
and you've told me stories of where you go in and straighten up some of the graves out of respect, and I love those stories.
Yeah, some of them just really uncovering.
I mean, you don't clean the gravestones or anything, because
Not yet.
You have to be very careful with that. But so I don't want to encourage anybody to do that. But I just mean some of the grass around the gravestones.
Yeah, I mean, just uncovering some of the, a lot of older cemeteries are not. I mean, they're a lot of family plot, especially in New England. It's not uncommon to see a small plot with dozen or 2 dozen burials. I stopped at one of my favorite cemeteries in Rhode Island just a couple weeks ago, and it's located in the back of a college campus now, where I went to college. And it was the first time I'd been back in that cemetery in 30 some odd years. It was kind of neat to see, but at the same time sad to see, because the condition, was a lot rougher than I remember it. And of course just deterioration of the stones and stuff like that. But in any case, it's it was always been a hobby of mine for a long time.
More than a hobby. I mean, I
was going to say, and then I took my my profession in the computer industry and kind of steered it toward the direction of genealogy back in I forget the year now, 1998, I guess it was, when I joined Ancestry, and.
That was at the beginning, right? I mean, when
Ancestry had been around, a lot of folks don't know. I mean, of course, nowadays everybody knows Ancestry.com and the DNA test and all the other stuff. But Ancestry began as a print-based publisher of books and magazines, largely catering to the library market. Some, very, very large kind of, reference books that almost every library had. And probably still has in their collections. And then over time, the company changed hands from the original owner to some folks, with more of an expertise in the digital space, who had visions of taking some of the data and putting it on CD. So they went from kind of print-based
those CDs
to selling CDs with data about whatever, census data and all sorts of other data. And then, in the I'm going to call it, trying to remember, 1997 time frame or so, or either 96 or 97, Ancestry began putting some of its data sets online as a subscription-based content, which at the time was kind of unheard of, because people were thinking, I don't subscribe to websites. Everybody thought the internet should be free, especially when you're talking about public access to public records, where
I think people pretty much still think that.
Yeah, but
that hasn't changed a lot.
No, but you look at things like, for many years, the leading subscription-based services, subscription content, were things like Consumer Reports, Wall Street Journal, Ancestry, and of course now it's a completely different game, because digitization technology has advanced, and now all sorts of stuff is not only online and indexed, but you also have the image that corresponds with it. So if you look at something like census data, you can look up a name from the 1900 census, and then click, and within a few seconds you're looking at the actual digitized image as well, which is ultimately what people want.
Hey, I'll just take you back to sort of a similar evolvement in legal research. When I went to law school, the first month you're in law school, they took you up to the library. There was no online research available, so you went up to the library and they taught you how to shepherdize, which is you look at a case and
in a book.
Yeah, in a book. Let me make that in a really hot library, because I don't think the library even had air conditioning, if I recall. So it's because it's September, the beginning of the year. Really hot library. You're looking at some book. You get the citation, and then you go to books that are issued like every couple months that are kind of in paperback, and you look up that case citation, and then underneath it you look for citations that reference that one to see if the law's changed or what other cases have said about that. And then you write down those case citations and you go to the books where those are and you look those up. Nuts, huh? And then it evolved into the CD thing. You could get CDs instead of having to look at those paperback books, and the CDs would be more up to date and more
like
timely.
a LexisNexis type
Yeah,
of thing?
well,
or Westlaw?
I don't even, yeah, I mean, I guess, I don't remember. But of course, then now it's gone online. So if you go to a lawyer's office and they are actually relying on books, you need to go to another lawyer, because the up-to-date stuff is online, not in the books.
Yeah.
Those are just for show, or they should be just for show. No lawyer should be using books anymore. I'll put it that way. Okay, go ahead.
No, I mean, they are fascinating. I mean, I've gone to a couple libraries in Connecticut that have, in fact, the old Litchfield Courthouse, before they moved to the new facility in Torrington, they had some of the old case law books going back to the very beginning of, and I found it fascinating just to read these, So
It is.
some of the early cases where things are kind of all mixed up into one book, and I didn't care what the case was necessarily. I just like to kind of read what types of legal disputes, and of course, family historians love that kind of stuff too, because I mean, people tend not to even think about it, but you get beyond birth, marriage, death records, census records, but you start to think, if you have a family member involved in like protracted litigation over property or probate issues, that's just a lot of opportunity for there to be testimony and just things covered in the record that ultimately end up getting talked about.
Absolutely.
And they might give a name or a clue or a date, or so-and-so who had to travel from Maryland to testify, or whatever it is. That becomes, a clue that family historians want to. But,
Which is one reason why sometimes it's better to settle than to go to trial, because no matter if you win or lose a trial, a lot of things come out about you that are there forever, that you may not want out there forever.
Right.
And so some people do consider that, certainly.
Yeah, it's part of the public record. And so, but anyway, to kind of bring it, back full circle back to the U.S. Supreme Court thing. So, I mean, as somebody who's worked in the field of genealogy and family history since '98, at a number of different levels, and traveled around quite a bit and doing lectures and all that type of thing, we're very spoiled in terms of the ability to, meaning in the United States in particular, the records that we have, I think, are extraordinary, and to the extent that people take the time to learn how to use them correctly, especially when you get to things like census records. And so our census is every 10 years. The first one was done in 1790, and every 10 years since. And it really fell, of course, now it falls to the Commerce Department to decide what questions are going to get asked. And the reason for it, I mean, it's the provision for the census is in the Constitution, basically so that every 10 years they can know, that Congress that there's proper representation for the citizenship. And so when you have a growing nation that's expanding around, you want to make sure that, there's the right mix of representatives. And so that's why we have a census. And, it's grown over time, not in terms of just the number of people that it's counted, but the questions that get asked. And like I said, I think it was, I mean, I could check, because I grabbed something when I was leaving the house this morning, and I look, and I think among questions that have been asked, so 1890, I put together a little cheat sheet for myself a couple of years back, but apparently 1890 was the first year that what I consider to be citizenship-related questions began to appear. Number of years that you've been in the United States, whether or not you're naturalized or an alien, whether naturalization papers have been taken out, the year of immigration to the United States, and if naturalized, what was your year of naturalization? So again, in 1890 they asked a lot of these questions. In 1900 they asked them, 1910, 1920, 1930, 1940. I know that as recent as 1950 they were asking them on the primary form, and then sometimes just for expediency, there's sometimes the things that come off of the what I'll call the short form, and then there's a longer form that gets sent out to a much smaller portion of the population. And so I think 1950 was the last time that a citizenship-related question appeared on the census on the main form, and then I think it got kind of pushed off to the secondary form in 1960, and then I don't think there's been one on there since.
So when you're talking about forms and taking the census, I think of somebody coming to the door and asking questions. Does that happen? Do census takers come to the door and ask questions, or do they drop off the sheet, or does the sheet come in the mail? How does that work?
That's actually a good question. So how it started was there were people who are commissioned as, I think, they're called census enumerators. I think they might have actually been considered marshals at the time, but they did go door to door and have to canvass a certain, geographic area. And of course, in some cases, you're talking about a pretty large, area. And there was a specific date that was set. So how we do it in the United States is, and the date has changed. The actual census date has changed. And I won't get into the details as to kind of how and why and when and everything. But let's.
Well, if you want to, I'd be interested.
Nah,
No?
maybe
Okay.
maybe
Well,
some
maybe
other
if
day
we
for a
have
different
time.
show, but
Okay.
not for this show.
Okay, well-
And so when you say the
You
census
just want to
date,
come back, that's all.
the census date, we could do a whole show just on census. But the census date, let's just say if it was set for April 1st, and as it was like in 1940. So the current census that somebody can go look for information about themselves, the most recent one that's available for public inspection is the 1940 census. And that's because they have a 72-year kind of privacy hold, if you will, on the content of the census. And so, even though there's clearly a 1950 census sitting on ice somewhere, right now I think it's under the control right now of the U.S. Census Bureau. And then when the 72-year anniversary comes over, it transfers from the U.S. Census Bureau, who keeps it secure, and then it goes over to the National Archives and becomes part of our kind of public, archive.
So that one became, the 1940 census became available in 2012?
In 2012 was kind of interesting. So it was 2012, but April 1st fell on a Sunday that year. And so even though it was supposed to be available on April 1st, it was a Sunday. And, most places weren't open, libraries and National Archives and all that type of thing. So April 2nd was actually the public unveiling of the 1940 census, and it was a huge event.
I was going to say, do genealogists have, I know
They break the internet.
Yeah, I mean, during the Oscars, they have Oscar parties. Maybe they have genealogy parties.
There's a lot of stuff that
which
takes place.
doesn't sound exciting to me, but
It is, trust me. I mean, well, it was this year, in 2012 it was amazing. I mean, for me it was particularly exciting because there was a whole, how they went about it, based on the experience from 10 years prior. And I wasn't kidding when I say they broke the internet. I mean, there's the headlines from almost every media outlet, whether it be, television, print, whatever, all talked about within those couple of days about just the unprecedented number of people who were going online to try to get access to the data.
no, I do believe you.
Yeah, so it was kind of fun.
I do, yeah.
But that particular year in 2012, I was asked to be, a national spokesperson for the satellite media tour that we ended up doing. So I went down to Washington, D.C. There were a whole group of companies that came together, and some nonprofit like the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Mormons.
No.
I know.
They're not called, no.
I know.
Okay.
So the Latter-day Saints had, they have FamilySearch.org, which is, one of the, primary websites out there for family history research. And you had a number of other companies who came together, another company out of the UK called Find My Past. I'm drawing a blank right now as to all the companies that were involved in this, but there was a consortium that all agreed that they were going to work together rather than everybody run out and try to reinvent the same wheel. Everybody's after the census data, and it would be somewhat silly, and so they kind of banded together. And I think Ancestry at the time had taken, one approach and was going to do it on their own, and then there was a consortium of companies that worked together to essentially try to make the data available as quickly as possible. Now, the images were available immediately, but the trick is people don't want the images. You need a keyword searchable index. Unless you happen to know specifically where your family member was living, you can go and say, show me Connecticut, show me New Haven County, show me the city of Waterbury, show me what district or ward within the city, and then you find the sheet that way. But the census enumerators used to go door to door, and people were expected to, it's all interesting because it's self-reported data. So if somebody came knocking at your door and it's 1880, some people trusted local government officials, some people didn't. Some people might be recent immigrants where they came from a country where it's like you don't talk to federal people. So things in the census, you have to take them with a grain of salt. Things like, what's your age? Some people didn't like giving their true age. Or if you look at every 10 years, I get a kick out of the Irish research that I've done, even for my own family. Every 10 years, the women get younger and younger and younger. So they age 10 years, then they age 7 years, then they age 5 years. It's like, well, this is interesting. But at some point, and I don't remember the detail when, they did, for the most part, end the practice of sending enumerators door to door, and then they started using mail, and people would, receive the form and have to kind of self-report.
But I've seen advertisements for jobs to be involved in the census.
I applied for one of those jobs. And
so what do they do if they don't go door to door?
And so what they do is there are still enumerators who will go door to door, but rather than go to door to door to door like every door, what the enumerator's job now is essentially kind of to chase after the ones that haven't come in. So they realize that we can get a lot of stuff done just by sending people things and then saying return your forms, which many people do. There's an obligation to participate in the process. People might think it's optional, but they want to know who's living where, so that they know how many people in the district and redraw the lines, and which, by the way, kind of gets us over into the other topic of gerrymandering, which we'll talk about too.
Oh, okay. I wanted to ask some questions though. So the next census that's going to be released is the 1950 census in 2022.
Correct.
I got that right.
Yep.
Well, we'll have to
April of 2022.
And so we have to look to see if April 1st falls on a Sunday, or maybe
I think
maybe
I've
during a
already
weekday or not, and get prepared for this, because it's only 2.5 years away, or less than 3 years away, right?
Right.
Yeah, so we have to get ready for that.
Oh, I know there's people already working on it. Yep.
My other question is, why is the Church of Latter-day Saints so involved in this whole genealogy thing? I mean, isn't that where people go for information? I mean, why them and not the Catholic Church or the Protestants or whatever? Why them?
I always feel somewhat inadequate trying to answer that question.
You've been asked it before?
Many times. I know the reasons why. I just don't ever feel appropriate responding to the question.
So there's no official position that they have on why they're involved in it that you could kind of just regurgitate. It's more like people's opinions or whatever.
No, I mean the Mormon Church. I know the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'm not a member of the church. I was raised there in Connecticut. In an Irish Catholic, Irish/Italian Catholic family.
Well, we have in Connecticut we have a very large new church that they built in Farmington. So clearly there's a number of people here in Connecticut that belong to the church.
Yeah, there's a very large Mormon population living in Connecticut. Certainly in the New Canaan area, I know, and up around here, but. The activity, so genealogy, I mean, so a lot of folks just think, oh, well, the Mormons only kind of research, records from their own faith. That's not the case. They've done great work really around the entire world of documenting and preserving records from any faith, any people, anywhere. As part of their faith, they do believe in the ability to, and hopefully I'll kind of convey this correctly, but as part of being baptized into the Church of Latter-day Saints, you can do baptism by proxy. And so as opposed to a situation like, say, for instance, and there are some controversial things that have taken place over time, but if they can show documentation that involves, of course, birth, marriage, death, and other records. If they can document people multiple generations back that, will be baptized into the church, even though, so that's the proxy, is the documentation to prove that these individuals are family members. And so that's kind of why it became important for them to be so good at record keeping and preserving records, and the Granite Mountain Vault, which I think a lot of people know. So I think it's the largest collection of microfilm in the world is in Utah, in the Granite Mountain Vault. And
are they still putting things on microfilm? Microfiche, whatever it is?
Well, it was fish, then it was film, and then with the digitization technology. So now I think they still certainly have the microfilm there, but they've been rapidly trying to electronically digitize their microfilm and make it available. I've just lost touch over the last couple of years as to. It's staggering when you go out there. I've never been to the vault, but to go to the Family History Library in Salt Lake City, which is it's kind of the mecca for all family historians. You know, that's the place you want to go to, and you can't even fathom being there the first time you're there. It's just it's the classic kid in the candy store where you just kind of have to pace yourself and say, wait a minute, really focus on what it is you're there, because you become overwhelmed in the fact that you know that all the answers, many of the answers, are kind of sitting around if you kind of know where to look.
They probably have a guide or a book at this stage to read before you go, so you can maybe acclimate yourself and not walk in and be so lost.
Oh, many of them. Yeah, many books. And then there's also people, and I will say too that the missionaries and the volunteers that are there are absolutely fantastic. And they're people who specialize in all the different parts of the world. So depending on, the research that you might be doing for your ethnicity might be completely different than what I'm interested in versus the person who's standing next to me. You go to a different part of the building and there's somebody who not only might specialize in Italian research, but, can, I don't speak or read Italian. I've gotten good at reading, birth, marriage, and death records over time that are in Italian, but if it weren't for some great free assistance that I got from volunteers, missionaries working at that library over time, I would have had no idea. I would have wasted a lot of hours, many, many hours.
I remember when you found a really cool document for my family from my mother's side, and it must have been from the 1940 census. Remember that? Everything was kind of all scribbled in on that sheet, and it had my grandparents on there, I think, and when they had come to this country.
It sounds like a census.
And then I think my mom was like 7 at the time, obviously, in the 1940 census, and it had her brothers and sisters listed. You got that off the internet, I think.
Yeah, that probably was. And
I've never seen anything like that.
You'd made a joke before about about April of 2012 about whether or not that was a big day, but one of the things that became almost a game online within genealogical circles anyway was people went hunting around for celebrities. Before they were celebrities, they were just people, and people who, and so and of course.
Catch people in lies maybe about their age and stuff.
No, not lies so much. It's
not lies. I don't mean that in a bad way.
It's just fun to find them kind of in the context of, what was their occupation back in 1940, or of course many of them were little kids or something, but their parents' occupations and where were they living, what was the real family name, who were their siblings. And it was just kind of fun. I think a lot of people, of course, Betty White. I mean, I'm trying to think of some of the celebrities. I know I had a particular thing where I had traced down every president in every census. So to me, the first thing I want to do, because it's fun, because by the way, the census, also includes the president living in the White House, and so it's kind of fun to go and see in the District of Columbia to see 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, and it's it says name and then occupation, president. It's just okay. That just happens to be their job.
So let me calculate this. The 1960 census will come out in 2032, right?
Correct.
And that'll kind of have. I just thought of this off the cuff, so I don't know if I'm getting the dates right for President Obama, but that'll have more information about President Obama, right? So a lot of people will be looking at that.
Oh, well.
But a lot of people who are interested won't be alive anymore. So that's why they do it, right? Because by the time you find out this information, it's kind of like people aren't interested anymore, so it's not a big deal.
I mean, it's interesting to think about the concept of the census with the 72-year, privacy restriction. I do remember, it's kind of a bittersweet thing. I remember the excitement of the 1940 census coming out and finding my parents. It was the first census that included my parents.
Yeah, it would have been mine too. Yeah.
And so, I was so excited to get it and then to print it out and to share it with them and show them. And then, of course, their brothers and sisters and whatever, and their, the family makeup and who's living where. And then what's neat about it is it tends to trigger memories for relatives like, oh, that's right, we were living so-and-so. And then they could also see, because the way that the census enumerator did it, back to your question, they went door to door, and so you're literally looking at the whole neighborhood, and then people start remembering like, oh yeah, that's right, because three doors up, I mean, people would marry the girl next door, or whatever. And so you sometimes kind of stumble across a family member where people would say, "Oh, that's right, because a couple houses up, there was this other family who came from here," and you get some other clues that way. But then it becomes a thing too. Is you hope you live long enough to see yourself in the census at some point.
Well, yeah, we're going to have to make it to 2032, I guess.
Right.
So yeah, let's keep our fingers crossed.
Yeah.
So while you start talking about is it gerrymandering or gerrymandering?
Gerrymandering.
Gerrymandering. Gerry.
That's not a person's name, by the way. It's not gerrymandering. I don't want you to think it's some.
Have you ever looked it up to see if there's a person named gerrymandering? In the United States?
I haven't looked that up, but I do know where the term gerrymandering came from.
Well, go ahead. I want to learn this.
So it came from Massachusetts governor in 1812, and even though there had been kind of the concepts of gerrymandering had predated that, but in 1812 the governor, I actually had to write his name down because I knew I wouldn't remember his name. Yeah, Governor Elbridge Gerry, Gerry.
Oh, okay.
And
a last name.
And that was his last name. And they said, and of course there had been the same accusations, basically, that various political parties had been accused of kind of redrawing district lines favorable to where they'd always end up winning. And so they would carve out these very unnatural, rather than just have little quadrants, they became these very unusual shapes.
Because if you're in power, why wouldn't you do that? If you're able to do it, you would do it to make sure you stay in power, right?
Right.
Okay.
And so back in the early 1800s, one of the famous case which gave birth to the name gerrymandering is they said that he was behind redrawing district lines that when you looked at it on a map, it ended up looking like a salamander, and so therefore it became because it was Governor Elbridge Gerry, and then salamander, somehow it became gerrymandering. So that's where the phrase comes from.
Now the case that you're going to be talking about, is it the Rucho versus Common Cause? That was out of North Carolina, or what? There was another one too, right?
Am I going to be talking about a case?
Oh, well, let me fill in the blank then, because this gerrymandering is a very big issue right now.
There were like 4 cases. There was a North Carolina case, a Maryland case, Ohio case, and a Michigan case, and they're all several of these cases where at the state level there were challenges to the redrawing of district lines, saying that this is overly partisan, and it's discriminatory. I mean, ultimately, that's people are saying that it discriminates against minorities, and that in violation of the Voter Rights Act. And I think ultimately he went to the Supreme Court to say, end this practice. And the Supreme Court said, we're not going to get involved.
Yeah, let me read. That's perfect. That's exactly what happened. Rucho, R-U-C-H-O versus Common Cause. This was just decided on June 27th, like we said at the beginning of the show. A lot of the cases just came out. And basically, Justice Roberts, I think.
Yep, Roberts wrote it.
Delivered the 5-4 majority opinion. So it was a close case. Federal courts are charged with resolving cases and controversies of a judicial nature. In contrast, questions of a political nature are non-justiciable, and the courts cannot resolve such questions. Partisan gerrymandering has existed since prior to the independence of the United States, and aware of this occurrence, the framers chose to empower state legislators, expressly checked and balanced by the federal Congress, to handle these matters. And then they just go on, and there was a dissenting opinion, obviously, and then the case was consolidated with the Lamone versus Bensasek, and the court released a single opinion resolving both cases. So they decided to stay out of it. A lot of people think that all issues can be resolved in court, but there are a lot of reasons why courts, especially federal courts, just bow out and say, this is not a matter that we're going to decide.
Yeah.
Right. States are called courts of general jurisdiction, and federal courts are courts of limited jurisdiction, which means federal courts don't accept a lot of things. It has to fit right into some statute or other reason for bringing it to a federal court. So they do bow out of a lot of stuff. So that's interesting. They didn't decide the issue. I thought there was one case where they did decide something about gerrymandering, though, out of Virginia maybe or something. I'll have to look it up.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because I hadn't really even stop to think about the connection between the citizenship issues and the census. And then, of course, as soon as you start talking about the census, I'd forgotten about the whole issue with gerrymandering, because every 10 years, when there is a census, it gives the opportunity for people to redraw district lines based on fresh census data.
Right.
Because, now we have, if you think about it, with the data and the technology we have, it's an unprecedented ability to really carve things out. They can know exactly who's living where and draw some crazy districts, I'm sure, that will...
It's almost like a whole different offshoot of political science. They should have degrees in this kind of stuff, because anybody who's an expert in this could probably really be compensated well by a political party or a campaign, engaged in a national contest.
I don't know if there's degrees, but there's certainly people who do specialize, because when I was reading some articles just about, the reaction to the opinions, all the various people who are quoted in these articles are different people who work at universities who are specializing in, redrawing of district lines and stuff. So, that's certainly...
And then, if you want to go even further, look at how immigration impacts this as well. The census, and then setting up the districts. Does one party want to have immigrants who maybe aren't yet here legally engaged in the voting process? Does another party,
I think so,
not want that? And then so that whole concept comes into it, and then we get back to the issue of, should the census be asking questions about whether, like they did in 1890, I guess, whether people are naturalized citizens or immigrants? And that's a whole nother issue that's being brought up.
I can't fathom. Since the beginning of the controversy, which probably goes back to the day that Trump was elected, but for the last couple of years, this controversy has come up, as everybody's known that there's going to be a 2020 census, and I just think it's so out of line for people to be saying, "No, you can't ask a citizenship question." Of course you could. Of course you should be able to, and of course it's valid data. Yes, we're a melting pot, but we've been a melting pot for a while.
Well, how about this, though, Dan? If it is against the law to be here illegally, if someone is asked that question, would they not be incriminating themselves to answer?
Well, then, in my mind, that raises another issue. What right are they going to claim? They're going to claim that it's a First Amendment constitutional right against...
No, it's the Fifth Amendment right against... No, I know what you mean.
Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. That's great, but you're not protected by that because you're not a citizen of this country. So
well, I think they are, though. If they're here.
And not if you're not... my
belief is... do some research on that.
My belief is if you're not here legally...
Right.
You're not protected. That's my view.
Yeah, you know what?
There's a process. People forget there is a process, and you come, and the process has changed over time, and it changed throughout the 1800s. And there was a time, not long ago, and when you look at the whole history of things, but I'm as I referenced earlier, right, half Irish, half Italian descent. There was a time 100 years ago or 110 years ago where people were just disgusted with how many Italians were coming to the United States. And, you pick up a newspaper from then, if you picked up the New York Times or something and read, some of the leading newspapers back in 1900, 1905, 1910, you wouldn't believe some of the things that had been written about, ethnic groups in a particular, whether it's... And there was a time when people were sick about, hey, there's too many, whatever, it was Irish or Chinese or, whatever it was. There were always people that seemed to have an issue with different groups for different reasons.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. But, for example, if someone is not here legally, but they are arrested for murder and they're in the custody of the police, those rights do attach. You can't force a confession or beat somebody up to get a confession out of them or deny them counsel, if they're charged with a crime.
Simply because they're not a citizen.
Right.
Well, I don't know. I find.
And I'm not an expert either. I may be an attorney, but when issues come up, I always research them and look them up. So please, do it's not an issue I've researched because it hasn't come up in my, legal practice, but I'm just saying, I believe that when, whether you're here legally or illegally, when you're arrested for a crime, the rights do attach.
Yeah, I mean, I know that, if you look back at data, let's call it right around 1900, I mean, there was a process, and somebody would come over here, if their goal was to come to this country and become a citizen and have all the benefits of citizenship, but also contribute to the country. So they'd come here, they would file their declaration of intention, which is a fairly, comprehensive and lengthy doc. These are the kinds of documents that family historians want to get their hands on, because a declaration of intention would say, would capture all sorts of information, but, what is your exact name? So that when people tended to be, very specific about their name, they'd give the full first name or the given name, the middle name, their family name. Where are you coming from? Do you have any other family members here? Who's the nearest relative living here? Who are you staying with? What was your address before you came here? So there was a lot of good clues on here from a genealogy perspective. But then there was a waiting. And then of course, names of other individuals who might serve as kind of references to say, hey, I know he's a good guy. Do you have a job? What do you do? And then there was a waiting period. Now I think the waiting period changed over time, whether it was 5 years or 7 years, or and at the end of that waiting period. Of course, the goal is that during that period of time you don't get yourself in any trouble and get arrested and all that type of thing. But then you go from your declaration of intention to your petition for citizenship. So now you've waited whatever the statutory time was, and if it was 5 years or 7 years, I'm just drawing a blank right now as to when it changed. And I don't know that it was ever actually 7 years. I don't know if there's somebody who's listening who might know. Maybe there's another genealogist, but let's say 5 years. At the end of that period of time, now they want to become a citizen. And they do their petition for citizenship, which largely repeats a lot of the same information, but it's a separate form, and it's done 5 years later. And then at some point they get approved or not. I have seen papers filled out where people didn't get approved.
I know.
And in one case, I won't say who this was, because it's an interesting case, because it was kind of a notable individual. And the reason for denying them citizenship was, it said, the specific reason listed was not of good character, was the exact words that were written on this. And I remember, I've only seen that twice. And it really catches your attention.
Kind of like the pistol permit process in Connecticut, not suitable. What does that mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
now, do other countries have a census like we do? What do they do to keep track of their citizens, if you know? Because I'm thinking about Australia. Boy, that would be interesting to go back in time and see who came there, huh? Because a lot of those people supposedly were coming last chance not to go to jail.
Colony.
Right.
It was a penal.
So those would be those would bring up kind of the skeletons out of the closet for wherever they came from, right?
But you say that, but what's interesting is and so it's not the case over there. So they have and it's interesting, you should ask a census question about Australia, because they don't do the census like we do the census. In fact, historically there are really no census records that haven't been retained. Statistically there's a census, and statistically they're captured, but they didn't retain the data about family groups over the years. But what's interesting here,
probably on purpose, maybe.
Well, I don't know why they made decisions.
Let the past be the past.
But in the United States, we do. A lot of families do research, and individuals do research, and they want to connect to a Revolutionary War person, or somebody in the Civil War, or a Mayflower, passenger. In Australia, they go out of their way. They want to connect to a convict, and so they do a lot of convict.
Yeah, I can see that.
Convict, we'll do research and say, okay, here's an immigrant through Ellis Island. They do research trying to document and get very excited about connecting to a particular convict who was sent over.
So our Daughters of the American Revolution, they probably have some equivalent organization, Sons of Convicts or something like that, maybe?
I'm sure there are. I don't know them. I mean, I've been down there and met many of the leading genealogists in Australia, and at some point somebody might see the show and will correct me. How could I not have known? I just remember being stunned when I realized, wow, they have to do all the research without the benefit of every 10-year census. Other countries do censuses as well. I think, things like in Canada or the UK. What's notable and different about theirs is, so on our census, there's a date fixed. And so early, I think I referenced like April 1st. And so clearly the enumerator couldn't have run around and done everybody within all, on April 1st. And so he or she might have had, 4 to 6 weeks to canvass that particular, whatever their assigned area was. But it was always based on April 1st. And so even if the mother, let's just say that they went to the door and a mother answered the door holding a baby who was just born, let's say they get there on April 7th. And the baby was born on April 5th. It might be crying right in their ear. If that baby wasn't born on April 1st, technically that baby's not supposed to be listed in the census.
That makes sense.
And so
that makes a lot of sense.
And the same goes for somebody who might have died. And so you have a situation where if the person died, just prior to the enumeration, if they weren't, in other words, if somebody wasn't born or if somebody had died, if you were alive and living in that place on April 1st, that was the day, period. And you're supposed to kind of just ignore everything else and just affix the population at that snapshot in time. There were a lot of examples throughout the census where things weren't necessarily done correctly, and it becomes fun to kind of, stumble across and find some of those. In Canada and in the UK, they do an overnight census. And so it's
sort of like the parking in Boston, 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. It's got to be done.
Oh yeah, so
okay.
So I remember a couple of years back because I was going to be in. I had a relative who was living in Bromsgrove was the area, and I say relative, he's a distant connection.
In where?
Bromsgrove. It's kind of near.
Is that Boston?
No, it's in England.
England.
And
well, we have a lot of same names they do.
Yeah, northern England, and so he. I remember I was scheduling my trip and I realized that there was a strong possibility that I might be in the country during their census, which clearly I don't live there. But if I was there during an overnight census, I could have, if I stayed at his house, could have been listed along with the family. Like, who's in the house? So it would have been fun for researchers, 100 years down the line to be figuring out, like, why?
Who was that guy?
Why is he there, But they do an overnight census, and it's, the forms get sent. And again, self-reported. So the families will all fill out it's family by family by family. It's not the whole neighborhood, So it's kind of a little bit different.
Yeah, you're usually here when Ed and I do shows, so sometimes we go stream of consciousness. So yeah. I'm going to kind of insert some things because when you're talking, you make me think of things. And it'll give you a break too.
Plus I need water.
So when you were talking about if a child's not yet born on April 1st, even if you know about it before the census is over, you can't count that child. There's got to be
correct
a date certain for when the information is relevant or eligible for inclusion. And I was just reading a United States Supreme Court case, and I think it came out this term. I think it just came out. And the issue was, in the Ninth Circuit, there was an en banc decision that was written by Judge Stephen Reinhardt. And it was a close decision, and he wrote the majority, which prevailed. But it was, a difference between one judge, right? And so he wrote the decision, and then it actually was filed maybe 10 days later. But in the interim, he died.
Oh, no.
So the Ninth Circuit said his decision still applies.
I would think so if he wrote it and signed it.
But what the Supreme Court said is no. Oh. Because up until the date it is filed, any judge can change their mind. And so until it's filed, it doesn't really apply. And since he died before it was filed, and he may have changed his mind up to the date it was filed, they reversed the Ninth Circuit. They do reverse the Ninth Circuit a lot. You almost feel bad for the Ninth Circuit because they are always getting reversed.
Ed, did you hear that? You call in. Rachel just said you almost feel bad for the Ninth Circuit.
Well, when it comes to First Amendment, we love the Ninth Circuit.
Okay.
Let me just tell you that.
First Amendment.
The First Amendment, right. So, and when it comes to the First Amendment, I love Justice Sotomayor. Yeah, so you can be torn, like in life. You can be torn between things. So when you said that, it reminded me of that. This is probably not that well known because, the Supreme Court decision just came out and people were arguing both sides. So maybe it's the first time something like that's happened.
That is interesting.
It is, I know, yeah.
Did you? I know this is completely unrelated, but you just triggered my memory. Did you happen to see the case? I think it was out of Michigan, like a week ago, where there was a couple being divorced, and it was the issue of the gentleman had bought a winning lottery.
Oh, we talked about that. I didn't see it, but we talked about it.
Yeah, I mean, he won.
So
he won a big lottery. He won a big lottery.
A lot.
Yeah.
Because I think the wife or ex-wife, is she still the wife? I think that's the whole issue, right? They're not actually divorced yet?
Well, the divorce was at the time that the ticket was purchased and in the lottery, the numbers were pulled, they're divorced. Now, I don't know in the time since whether or not, whether divorce has been finalized. But I guess that was the issue. At the time the ticket was purchased and the numbers were drawn, it was his ticket, he bought it. He wins a huge jackpot, tens of millions of dollars, and then the question is, I think it was over $100 million.
It was a lot.
It was a very, very large jackpot. And then the question was, well, wait a minute, they're still married.
So it becomes a marital asset.
Until they're divorced, they're still married. And so that was yet another example of, I thought, oh, boy.
I mean, what if he got the money to buy that ticket from a friend? What? In other words, did the wife contribute to the purchase price of the ticket? But maybe it doesn't matter. It's a marital asset. Even if he got no matter where he got the money from, if the money was going to him, then I guess maybe it would be different in different states depending on what law.
I think it's got to be. And then I also think, I mean, I didn't read it. It would be interesting to read the opinion because I think it's different than if you're talking about a nominal. $1 or $2 game of chance is really what it is. I could see people saying it doesn't matter where the money came from to buy it. It's $1 or it's $2.
Right.
I think it'd be different if he, let's just say he bought, he had a group of friends who got together and together they came up with $50,000 and they bought Bitcoin before Bitcoin suddenly had this, explosion. Then the question could be, all right, well, hang on a second. Did she participate in the, because that's a significant investment, and that's not a game of chance, although to some, in some respects it is. But it's a significant investment with a hope of, with possible loss of principal, but the hope that it increases in value. Who knows? But he would have had to, then in that case, though, he would have had to disclose that, too.
And why would he do that while divorce is pending? That seems sort of insane.
Well, I mean,
no. Well, I guess it could be pending for a long time, though. You can't just stop.
Yeah, you got. Yeah. I mean, if somebody came,
it's a good opportunity.
Somebody, you get a phone call. Hey, there's 10 of us. We're all going to go in and try to buy this Bitcoin because we think, and we've been watching the markets. And I could see somebody saying, yeah, you can't, like you say, you can't not do things.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I wonder how that. I mean, I don't know what the financial circumstances were of each of them, but let's say maybe he was supposed to pay alimony or something. I would think that would get him out of that, right? Or it would get her out of that, whichever way you want to say it.
Well, not. I mean, well, the other issue depends on how they accept the payout. Because I have read Connecticut case law on these issues where if somebody takes the lump sum versus the payout, if it's a lump sum, it's an asset. But if it's every month or whatever the heck it is, every week, then it's income because it's a regular stream of income over, say if it's $1,000 a week for life or whatever some of those prices are, that's income.
Well, both of them have the money to pay an accountant and should probably get some advice from a tax attorney and an accountant.
And an attorney.
Yeah, everything.
Right.
Get advice from everybody.
I only feel so bad for them.
Now, why is Ed calling my cell phone? Ed? Call in on the line. We're doing the show. Okay, bye. So Ed may be calling in from the hospital. So what subject are we working towards that we have laid the groundwork already for, with some minor digressions and interruptions?
Well, we touched on the U.S. Supreme Court's, decision, if you will, or I should say opinion on ruling on citizenship questions. We touched on then the issue of we're not going to get involved in gerrymandering challenges and redrawing district lines on a state level. That's, for the states to figure out that political process, which I think there was a lot of people who were very disappointed, saying that this is kind of almost a rubber stamping the process and almost endorsing, like, yeah, we know this takes place, and we're going to let it keep taking place, and kind of we don't want to get involved because it's some degree, I think it's a Pandora's box. We don't want to.
I know here in Connecticut, a lot of Republicans will say we have no chance, because even if the majority in terms of geography, the area, I'm not talking about numbers of people, but if you look at the land space of Connecticut, there's a lot of Republican coverage. The cities who vote Democrat are always going to win out in electing a Democrat governor. But let's interrupt this. Hello?
Mr. Peruta?
Hello? Hello?
How are you?
Dan, that's a great, good-looking shirt you got on, man.
Are you able to watch us, Ed?
Well, me and Joe Gasser are watching you on the tablet.
Hi, Joe.
Yep.
I'm glad you approve.
I'm assuming this isn't live, but I'm watching.
It's live. I was thinking about wearing a green shirt, Ed.
Why green?
I'm joking. Because it would just add to the complications for master control.
So what we have to tell you, Ed, what we have to say to you is what you always scream to people who call in. You can't watch the show at the same time you're on the phone talking to us, because it's confusing, okay? Because there's a bit of a delay.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, let me explain this to you.
So concentrate on the call.
I just showed Joe Gasser my Rodin stinker pose.
Okay, got it. I don't really want to talk about that, okay?
Rico probably going to fight about that. Dan, you saw my Rodin stinker pose, right?
I chose to ignore it.
Hey, Ed. When you're watching us, does the back look okay? Because I'm looking at the TV and it looks kind of fuzzy.
No, it looks fine.
It looks fine. Good. Okay, good. It's our TV then. Excellent.
Of course, I don't have my eyeglasses on. So, and what was funny is when you first started, all of the comments on the left were flowing over Rachel like she wasn't there.
Oh. Okay.
I know.
So you have anything to add to the substantive conversation today? You want to tell everybody how you're doing?
I'm doing fine. I'm waiting for a heart at Hartford Hospital.
Yep.
I'm kind of minding my own business. I have this giant poster of my Litchfield County, Litchfield Hills buffalo dog named Bassie. It's a Litchfield County herding dog. It stands about 6 feet tall, and it herds buffaloes in Litchfield County, Connecticut.
Well, what Ed's talking about is a cardboard cutout that I ordered from Wet Paint Printing online, and you send in a picture of your dog, and they will make a cardboard cutout of it. But I ordered one that I think is 4 feet by 2 feet, so it's probably way too big, and it takes up most of his hospital room at this point, but it is so cool, and I recommend anybody. They got it done for me like in 2 days. It was here, so I recommend anybody go there and look.
You're getting a lot of comments from the nursing staff.
I know, because it's so darn cute.
About the big dog in the window.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you know what, Ed? I'm gonna let you. Yeah.
How long? Well, never mind. I'll talk to you guys later. Good show. I'll talk to you.
Okay, you go back. You go back to getting ready. Okay.
Okay. Okay, bye.
Bye. They did a procedure on it that's kind of new. Usually when you're in the hospital and you're waiting for a heart, they put a balloon pump in you. And because it's in your aorta, you have to stay very still. You can't even get out of bed. But the one they gave him allows him to, not complete mobility, but to get out of bed, to sit, to do different things, which when you're in the hospital waiting for a heart, and it could be 2 weeks, or it could be 10 months, or you don't know how long it's going to be, it's kind of important to be able to get out of bed. So thank you, Hartford Hospital. Thank you, Dr. Gluck. Thank you, Dr. Lawler. Thank you all, Dr. Hammond. Thank you all the doctors over there and the nursing staff and the physicians, the patient care assistants, everybody, even the people from the cafeteria that come up to take his order for food. We can't say enough good things about Hartford Hospital. Thank you.
I don't know. You can stop me on this piece if it's if it takes us in a direction where we don't want to go, but
well, that usually happens on this show.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's interesting with, like a lot of people who've watched the show over time, I've certainly heard Ed very openly talk about his health, and I don't think there's any secret he's had in terms of he puts everything right out there, and he and I are very different in that respect. I'm very private, he's very open, and but I will say, as somebody who, over the last couple of years, Ed kind of got me involved in the process of shooting breaking news, and whether it's stringer or otherwise, and showing up on scenes and stuff. And I will say it's tough to, I know Ed's been doing this for 40 years, and he's had his company for 30 years, and he's been to many, many scenes, and I've not. I've filmed in court, and I've been to various fires and auto accidents and sadly fatalities and things like that, but it was a whole different experience just a few nights ago when you and I were on the scene of what ended up being at least one fatality. I never did follow up to see what the situation was with the other individual, but it just struck me how here it is, an individual we know who's in a hospital waiting for a heart. And yet these breaking news items that he's been covering for 40 years of his career, where there are people who, in many cases, lose their life, and these are the donors who, in some cases, they're donors.
I would encourage. I was at the DMV a couple weeks ago registering a car, and they have obviously all the signs around, because here in Connecticut, at least, you signify on your license if you're an organ donor or not.
Right.
And I am, and I have been for a long time, and I would encourage anybody to be an organ donor, because the things they can do now are amazing. And I can when we went on that, I was coming back from the office. It was about 8:30 at night, and I noticed police cars going very fast. And then you were in a different location, and you noticed it too.
Same thing, yeah.
And this is not my thing, going to accident scenes, or I'm always worried about interfering, or worried about this, or worried about that. I'm like the complete opposite of J.C. Playford, I'll put it that way. But I said, when they said that Lifestar was coming to the LZ, and the only reason I knew where that was, because I had been with it on one other occasion, when they mentioned the LZ, the landing zone, which in Harwinton is behind Town Hall,
right,
where they have a sports field or whatever. So I knew where it was, and that was not going to be confrontational. You just basically go there and you watch the helicopter come in and you watch it leave. So I did it. I went, and then you came as well.
Yeah, and for the benefit of those who don't, know the area, Lifestar, I don't know, is it called Lifestar everywhere?
No, they have different names for
helicopters. Lifestar, if you hear Lifestar is involved, it's essentially, it's a helicopter transport of a patient in urgent need of care.
Yeah,
and we don't have time to drive them to a hospital. And also, there might be, just in terms of coverage to the hospitals and stuff, and quite a distance, you don't want somebody in an ambulance for an hour I've been to a few situations where Lifestar has been dispatched, I don't know, maybe half a dozen, but this one really kind of caught my attention in a different way, because, you're sitting there thinking, I just thought of the irony of the fact that, Ed, for 30 or 40 years, he's been covering a lot of these breaking news. And sadly, as he's told me many of the different stories where individuals have lost their lives, and these are, to the extent that they are an organ donor, this is where, in many cases, his heart would come from.
And these hospitals that do these transplants treat, as far as I know, I mean, maybe there are people who have different stories and there are exceptions, but by and large, the donor families are treated with such respect. And there are opportunities for the recipient and the donor, if the donor wants it, if the recipient wants it, to be in contact. It means a lot to people to see, what has occurred, to follow up on it. So this is, for anybody that hasn't been involved in this, and hopefully people never are, but it is a whole new world when you get into this whole transplant
I don't think,
universe.
I don't think I had ever really fully thought it through until the last couple of weeks. Really.
Right.
I mean, I remember sitting down with Ed one day and kind of saying, "Look, I got some questions here. Like, what happens? Does your phone just ring one day and they say, okay, let's go? I mean, yeah. So anyway, so we know he's in the hospital, and we know he's waiting, and we
will keep you up to date.
I'm proud of Ed because he's got a great attitude about.
He does.
About a great and positive attitude about a situation that I think would probably quiet a large percentage of the population, but
exactly, yeah. I want to go back to, you were kind of summarizing what we already talked about, and one thing you had mentioned was going through case law. You can learn a lot about family history.
Yep.
Because cases should not be just reserved for lawyers or whatever. You can read cases, and they're like miniature stories, basically. A lot of them, it goes through the circumstances of what happened, and it can be interesting in and of itself, the story that's told, without even caring about the legal principles or anything like that. There are a lot of reasons to read cases, and one of the reasons you mentioned was just sort of, to get an idea about family history, follow up from maybe some other leads you had gotten. And I don't know if you remember this controversy in Connecticut, but for a time, before they got really strict about it, and I think enacted new rules, a lot of the cases were sealed in Connecticut.
What type of, all cases?
What they came to find out was people who had political influence, I think judges, people that didn't want their dirty linen or their dirty laundry aired in public would get their divorce cases, especially, sealed.
Yep.
So people wouldn't be able to look at it and go, look what happened in so-and-so's case.
Right.
Look who said what about who, and look who was doing what, and all that kind of stuff. And there were very lax rules about sealing. And if you're just a regular, and we've talked about this too in the context of threatening, if you threaten or allegedly threaten certain people, it's a big deal. But if it's somebody else, who cares if that person got threatened or not, right? And the cases were kind of like that. If you're somebody, then just because you're somebody, your case gets sealed. But if you're nobody, all your crap's out there for everybody to read. But they've gotten very strict about that. If there's a request to seal a file now, there has to be a hearing on it. People can come and object to it. A judge has to issue a ruling saying why it was sealed and everything else. So that has changed. And so when you talked about that, I remember that controversy that came up in Connecticut. It's been years now, maybe 8 or 9 years, maybe a little bit more since things have changed.
I mean, in recent years, I think a lot of people have been talking about just generally. I mean, if you look, commercials on TV and stuff, and there's a lot of people who've been introduced to the concept of family history through this DNA testing, which has become extraordinarily popular.
Oh, big issue. Yes.
And so, and I remember even Ed, talking about that from a couple years ago. But let's just say, certainly in the last decade, DNA testing It's become much more widespread, and it's introduced a lot of folks. Now, some people that's kind of what they want to know, like, hey, what percentage Swedish am I, or what ethnicity, what's my breakdown, and that's all they want to know. And it was kind of fun, and it was $99 to do the test and done. I think for other people, it kind of maybe will confirm some things that they're doing for research on other sides, But I think many individuals would be surprised at the things that you could learn through, Google and online searches that are fascinating for. When I say things, by the way, I'm talking now about case law.
Mm-hmm.
And Google Scholar is something that I use, not every day, but certainly every week. And you can go into Google Scholar and just, if you went in with the mindset of just put legal issues aside for a second, but if you just put your genealogy cap on and went to Google Scholar and just started doing queries about, like use the word like deportation in Italy, and specify a time frame around like 1900 to 1910 or something like that. You could find some really interesting cases that talk about individuals who, were in all likelihood trying to become a citizen, couldn't become a citizen, or were being deported, or issues about, and oftentimes there's really good detail in those cases, and I've got quite a number of them kind of flagged and saved. Really good detail about where the person was from, and their brother and their sister, and they give, like, in some cases, almost a little family tree right within the beginning of the case, before they then talk about the case and why the person's. Then of course they also tend to talk about the person stole this, the person did this, that's why they're getting deported. So.
Well, I mean, a big example of a lot of information that's coming out because of the explosion in access to DNA by the general public is a story we've often addressed on this show. That's how Ed found out who his biological father was. I mean, Ed, right. How old was Ed when he found that out? 66, 67?
Yeah.
Yeah, he was 66 or 67 when he found out that the man who raised him as a father, whom he loved and admired and talks about constantly and still does, was not actually his biological father. His biological father, whom he also knew, and who apparently took an interest in Ed, and
gave him his first job.
Ed gave him his first job, and kind of looked at him like a son to a certain extent. That was his biological father.
It raised a lot of questions for him, and it answered a lot of questions for him.
Right, exactly.
But what I also found interesting in Ed's case is, it wasn't as if Ed just had kind of a passing interest in some of this stuff. Ed was so rooted in his Peruta family, no play on words intended, but he didn't. I seem to recall that Ed went to like Poland and met with family members and
who turned out not to be family members.
Right, so he met all these people who actually, in the end, weren't even really family.
He thought he was Polish, but he wasn't.
Yeah, and he was Irish.
Yeah, and Belarus, or was that what he really wasn't? I can't. Now I'm confused. I think you're right. He was because Jim Hughes.
He was
Hughes, the Hughes family.
Yeah, in the end, he was Irish. So it's interesting. Now this is interesting too, because this sparks another memory. The New York State Legislature just passed a bill, and I guess it's been signed into law, or the signing is imminent, that are going to allow adopted individuals to receive their actual birth certificates.
That's big.
Yeah, which is big. I mean, it's come up in different states. I know Connecticut, several years back, then Senator Bill Finch had introduced legislation, because I know that he was adopted and he was, very kind of a strong proponent, and saying, hey, I should be able to get my actual birth records. If for nothing else, there's people who want their family health history to understand maybe possible predispositions toward, certain health conditions or whatever. And it did pass the House and the Senate in Connecticut, but then Governor Jody Rell would not sign it. And I know at the time very controversial. People were expecting it to be signed, and she wouldn't sign it. And she cited the privacy rights of the young mothers at the time, and she felt that it was going to be, and I had kind of a tiny bit of skin in the game there, because I had a grandfather, my paternal grandfather, who was adopted. He had been orphaned and then was adopted, and I just wanted access to some of the records at the time. to see if there were more clues that I could get. But
Well, let's look at the public policy reasons for maintaining the privacy of, the parents, especially the mother, I guess, would in most cases be the case. In the past, I think the public policy reasons were many women who gave up their children for adoption maybe weren't married, right?
yeah,
Or maybe they had reasons to be ashamed that they had a baby, and they never wanted to be identified as that person who had a baby. And that's why they're giving it up for adoption, whether it's because they couldn't take care of it, whether maybe it was because of a rape or whatever. Now, have those public policy reasons changed over time? I think to a certain extent a lot of them have. I do not think that women...
Maybe the policies haven't changed. I think maybe the stigma
the stigma
may have changed.
Do the reasons for maintaining the privacy of the mother still hold? That's a better way to put it, right? I don't think that many women are concerned about having a baby when they're not married anymore.
I mean,
I just don't.
But I'm sure that there are still some, depending, especially, again, depending on the maybe the cultural beliefs or there probably still are segments who it's just that the stigma is probably just as,
I got to tell you, I think those segments are going away quickly. I think the next 2 generations, or maybe 1 generation, once it's gone,
yeah.
I just, you look at it statistically, it just isn't.
I know now. I don't even know where I came to know about this, but I seem to recall that there's either a book or a documentary that's come out recently. I think it's called like "The Girls Who Went Away."
Yeah, that sounds familiar. Yeah.
All about, young women who, were expecting and again, whether it was the 50s or the 60s, it was too big a deal. And so they just kind of went away and came back and everything was.
A lot of these social mores are based on maintaining a society where people support themselves. The good of society. And I think there was a time where you wanted people to be married and you wanted women to have babies within a marriage because statistically, if women were having babies and weren't married, they were not going to be able to support that baby probably because they couldn't get the same jobs that men could get. And so you needed to encourage and place a stigma on women so that they would wait for marriage and have a baby when they're married, because otherwise the state's going to have them to be supporting these women who have babies. And we don't want that because that's bad. But now women can have babies and support themselves and the baby probably almost to an equal extent that men can support them. And sometimes the women are married to men and the women are pulling the weight of the baby and the man.
Yeah.
So all that kind of policy for really wanting women to be married when they have babies, and when you have that policy, then you place a stigma and a shame on it to make people conform to society. It's I'm sorry to say, or maybe I'm not sorry to say, I don't know, because depends on what your opinion is, it's kind of going away.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, state by state by state, it'd be interesting to know where all the states fall on the issue of the ability of an individual, a living individual who simply says, I want to see my original birth record. And I'd have a very difficult time. It almost
seems like a constitutional right, although it's not. But
Yeah.
It seems like it should be a human right to know who your biological parents were. It seems like a human right, doesn't it?
Yeah, I would, yes. And I'm sure that, and people have made that case, I guess. And
Yeah.
in some cases won, some cases lost. But, I think if I were in that situation, I would want to understand, like, is there something I need to, at the most basic level, I would think that somebody could have a very legitimate question. Forget about all the other things that they might want to know because they'd be interesting to know, and but within their own body, what's what's my genetic health history? You know, am I at risk for something? I mean, they might make different lifestyle changes or decisions based on.
I don't know.
Yeah.
This is not going to be an issue for much longer. You know, I for a couple reasons. I was thinking the other day, and I know this is going to get into arguments of government intrusion and privacy, but when we get dogs now, we put chips in them because we're worried about if the dog gets loose, we want to find the dog. That's a dog. But we have kids, and I will admit, I just watched on Netflix a series about Madeleine McCann, so this is fresh on my mind, the 3-year-old that went
From
missing in Portugal.
Yeah.
We have kids, but we don't put chips in them. I mean, we do it for dogs, but not for kids. So if a kid wanders off or gets adopted like Madeleine McCann, we can't find them. And I know what people are going to say. These are human beings. We can't put chips in them to find them. But I got to tell you, a little kid, if I had a child now, who wouldn't want to put a little chip in them to be able to find them if they were kidnapped or something? How could you not want that?
Or some type of technology.
Yes.
Whether it's embedded in clothing.
Yes.
You know, because I don't advocate putting a chip in a kid, but
Oh.
I understand the issue.
How about, I mean, we put little holes in earlobes now for kids. You know, people get the earrings or whatever. Put a little chip there. Of course, then you're saying, well, the abductor could cut their ear off. But I guess you would have choices where, and then the abductors are going to get like little machines that can detect if the kid has a chip, and then they're going to take it out. I don't know.
Well,
I guess it never ends.
I guess the way it's done now is everybody buys their kid, it seems like at younger and younger ages, everybody gets their kid an iPhone.
But somebody can take away the phone.
The phone's never out of their sight.
Right, right.
So, but
there's got to be. And so the other thing I was going to is I think in the near future, when kids are born, they're going to take their DNA. They're going to have it on file. And so even if the kid is adopted out, we're going to get to a point where everybody's DNA can be matched up to know who the hell they are and everything. And that's going to do away with your family search issue because it's all going to be scientific.
Well, but stop and think. I mean, you go to the doctor for almost anything, okay? Let's say if it's anything kind of more serious than a physical. And you know, the questions that get asked, well, okay, let's talk about your family health history. And they want to know, you know, is there any members of your family have heart disease? Any members of your family diabetic? Any members of your family, you know, cancer, whatever it is. Well, think about somebody who's never seen their actual birth record, who's adopted. And they go in, maybe sitting with a doctor or a specialist about a very serious issue, and they go, well, what's your family health history? I don't know. I'm adopted. I mean, so now it's a complete blank slate for probably one of the more important series of questions that the doctors could ask an individual. And they say, I don't know. I don't know. I'm adopted. I mean, I think that puts them at a significant disadvantage in terms of treatment alternatives or...
Oh, you know, it has a lot of implications because sometimes people choose not to have children because there's something that runs in the family.
Yep.
You know, it's heredity and you can pass this on, and it can be something quite serious. And so they choose not to have children to risk that. And that would not come into play at all either if you don't have your family history.
So the U.S. Supreme Court's been busy. Let's see what else on the notes. We did gerrymandering.
I'm going to look up the census case that you were talking about so I can kind of read off the...
Now, since it seems like we have a little bit of a genealogical theme here, there was one other one.
Well, what else could we have with you?
There was one other thing
now,
that
I mean, I didn't mean that. You are not a one-trick pony. You have a variety of knowledge about a lot of things.
That's all right.
But I know you're a private person, so I won't list them. But they're all very admirable. I'll put it that way.
Yourself. But I know you're originally from Maryland, so I'm hoping maybe you might know because I haven't read this case.
Oh.
But I know that the U.S. Supreme Court also recently issued a decision which I and others viewed as favorable when there was a large cross.
They call it the Maryland Peace Cross, PEACA, honoring military dead.
It was and I think it was put up after World War I, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yes, a tribute to World War
And
I.
it was a large, extremely tall concrete cross, and it
A little taller than the cardboard cutout of Bassie. It's 40 feet.
no,
40
yeah,
feet high.
a 40-foot, stone cross, and it's been in place, I think, since shortly after World War One. And there were people saying, well, it's got to be taken down because it's on public land. And you can't have a cross, a religious symbol on public land. And this, yet again, raised this issue of, historical monuments that are put up at different places and times, and whether, and that really, in my opinion, would have been bad to start to see, because at what point should every monument possibly be taken down? If they were going to, and I was quite glad to see that the U.S. Supreme Court said no. There was a group, I guess, that was trying to get this thing taken down.
Right.
And
the American Humanist Association was trying to get it taken down.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I listened to some of the oral argument in this case, which anybody can do. If you go to OYEZ, OYEZ, you can listen to oral arguments of all the Supreme Court cases. And I think you can go to the official U.S. Supreme Court website, too.
Yeah, that's where I used to listen to
Yeah.
it. I never even thought that there was another side.
For some reason, I think OYEZ is a little more accessible because they make comments, and it's run by a law school, and I can't remember. So I kind of like that a little bit better, too. It kind of gives you a rundown of things a little bit more. And it was a 7-2 decision. Justice Sotomayor and Ginsburg dissented. They think it should be taken down, or it shouldn't be up to begin. And it seemed like the majority basically ruled that it can stay up because it's been up there a long time. And it goes beyond religion. It's history, which I think you would agree with.
Yeah.
And they basically say you couldn't put it up now. This is not permission to go around putting up 40-foot crosses on public land.
Right, and that's the thing that I remember reading when I read like just a small snippet right after the decision came out, and it talked about, they said, this is a whole lot different than if you were to want to put one up now, which the answer would be no in all likelihood, or today's environment. But this is something that's, and I also think it's like a very small piece of land. I think it's like in a rotary or something. Yeah, so it's kind of like, how offensive is this? It's not offensive. It's a historical thing that's been there.
Well, see, Justice Sotomayor took kind of the opposite conclusion. She was asking the attorney that was representing, I think it's the American Legion, that wanted to keep the cross up. And she said, well, isn't it on a weird piece of land? It's like a little piece of land, and it seems like it was set up just for this. And she was making the argument it makes it worse because it's not really a public park that's dedicated to World War I veterans. It's just kind of in this little thing that's obvious to everybody. And I'm not sure what her argument was, but that's not the point I want to make. The point I want to make is she said you can't even park and go and look at it. And the attorney for the American Legion that obviously wants to keep the cross up, he goes, oh, well, that's not true. I've been there myself, and I've parked. There's a parking area here. And I'm thinking, are you allowed to say stuff outside the record to the United States Supreme Court?
Oh.
I mean, both of them, I think, were doing that, unless Sotomayor was relying on something that was in the record. But this guy's talking about how he went there and parked, and I'm thinking, I don't think that's in the record.
That's new evidence.
Yeah, that's new evidence. Not only that, but he said, so I don't agree with that representation, Justice Sotomayor. I'm like, whoa, that's being a little, confrontational with the justice, right? I don't agree with that representation. It's almost like calling her a liar, right? I don't know. I just thought that was an unusual interchange for...
He doesn't get to challenge her credibility.
Yes! Based on his outside the record trip to the cross?
Right.
But he won anyway. He won 7-2, so there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, just goes to show. Sometimes it's not the argument or the evidence submitted that the attorney makes. The issue itself is what makes the judges decide. A lot of people think attorneys have a ton of impact on things. Sometimes it's the issue, and sometimes it's the judges you're arguing to.
Yeah.
And there's only so much effect you can have, even if you're extremely rude. Which I think that was. I don't agree with your representation. I don't know. I just think that's a little rude when you're arguing before the United States Supreme Court.
It's been a few years since I used to listen to the oral arguments somewhat routinely, and then I stopped. I've been listening to podcasts about nutrition and things on YouTube instead.
Yeah, I know. There, sugar.
There's so much. Yeah,
Right, the sugar expert over here.
The evils of sugar and the benefits of salt. Yes.
Is there any reason to have sugar in the diet? There's none.
You meaning
We
meaning
you,
additional sugar?
you could go the rest of your life and not have sugar, right? And
Well,
it'll be
I'm-
fine. Do you need sugar?
You need a
do?
certain amount of glucose in your blood, but I can't. Yeah, I'm not qualified to talk about that stuff. So,
Okay,
yeah.
okay, then well,
I just try to sort it out from this.
disclaimer, probably nothing we talk about are we qualified to talk about. We're just talking.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, go on with your
So-
list here, Mr. Guest.
That was my list. My list is done.
Okay.
We did the religious symbols on government property and citizenship and gerrymandering and nobody named gerrymandering has called in to fess up. So I'm going to look that up though to see if there is a person with that name.
So let's talk about the Democratic debate. The debate that happened this past week for candidates from the Democratic Party for the presidential election in 2020. We got to start getting ready for the 2020 election, right? It's not too early.
Are we done talking about the last one? Oh no.
Oh, no,
We're still counting it.
no, we're not. It shouldn't have happened, or whatever people argue.
I still see new counts every day.
So yeah, so my take from it, from what I watched and what I read, was mainly what I read though, which makes sense to me.
I didn't watch it.
Is that the Democratic candidates went after each other because they're running against each other at this point, which makes a lot of sense, instead of going after Donald Trump. And so Donald Trump is sitting back saying, this sounds good to me. They're like tearing each other apart,
Right.
instead of tearing me apart, which for him is a new experience, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Plus, the media is doing a good job at that anyway.
Right, right. It's, yeah.
I mean, I think they went after Biden in particular. But again, I only read a couple of things about it, and I couldn't add a whole lot to this discussion.
I mean,
honestly.
I'll carry it a little bit because you've run out of your subjects, right? So I'll list a few.
And help.
And then you just comment, okay, if you want to. But my theory is, not one of those Democratic candidates emerged from the pack to say, this is what I would have said. I would have said, I'm not here to tear down my fellow candidates and Democratic Party members. Let's not go after each other. Let's go after the real enemy, who is Donald Trump. And I think that would have resonated with the voters, with people who are going to vote in the Democratic primary, don't you? Because I think they want to see their candidate go after Trump. Of course they do. That's the enemy, right?
How many participants were there?
There were a lot.
Yeah.
Like at least 10, right?
Yeah.
I think there were at least 10.
Well, okay. So I thought it was even maybe
I-
as many as 20.
Yeah, it could be.
And so I think at this stage the game is kind of like, look, I got to be able to make it to the finals, so to speak. This
Right.
is all preliminary stuff, and that's a lot of candidates.
It is.
With no clear. I shouldn't say, with such limited data, to say no clear front runner. I don't know. Maybe there is a clear front runner.
I don't know. I think they're saying Biden's the front runner now, but Warren gets a lot in there, and then that other guy whose name I can't pronounce. I got to learn. The mayor or the governor, this Pete Boating. I know.
I'm drawing a blank.
I know. We got to get that down. We got to memorize all the Democratic candidates.
Do I have to?
No, no, you don't have to. Another thing that I saw today, and this kind of is a cross between the immigration issue.
Oh, you can't use the word cross.
The
intersection.
The intersection between the immigration issue and the First Amendment issue and all that is, I'm sure, well, maybe not, but a lot of people, I'm sure, this week saw the picture of the father and the child dead at the border, and it was put in the media, and the picture is right there. You can go online and see it, and it's a very disturbing picture, obviously.
I've not seen it, and I'm glad I haven't seen it.
Yeah, because it's they're laying face down in the water. And the Republican American, our local paper out of Waterbury, came out with an editorial saying that this was terrible, that you shouldn't show this, that it's exploitation by people that are in favor of immigration, illegal immigration, I should say. People that favor illegal immigration are using the picture to exploit their cause and say, look at what Donald Trump's doing by not letting illegal immigrants in. I mean, but if he lets them in, are they still illegal, or do they become legal if he lets them in? I'm kind of confused about that.
I mean, there's a lot of media outlets that I've questioned over the last year or so, that even the evening news, it's so slanted, that I question why I even watch it.
But see, I'm not even sure I agree with the Republican American I agree with the Republican American that the reason these outlets are using these pictures is to make Donald Trump responsible somehow for these deaths. But on the other hand, I mean, we've spoken about this on the show before.
That's their job.
Those pictures should be out there, because if it exists,
people need to know it's real.
People need to know
right.
that it's happening. People need to know that this is what's going on. I don't understand this theory of only certain people should be privy to the horrors of life and the rest of us should be protected from it.
Well, I mean, yeah, like probably the best example that you've talked about in the show in the past is, had officials not gone in and documented with video footage what took place at the concentration camps, it would give more credibility to the absurd arguments of some who are saying, well, it never took place.
Yeah, no, that's the best argument ever for that.
And it's just like, look, you can't, yeah, anyway.
Anyway, well, I let's try to end the conversation on a high note.
4th of July is coming up.
The 4th of July is coming up. What anniversary is this going to be?
Oh, I don't know.
Oh my God, 1776 to 2019. That is a tough one. That doesn't ring any bells, does it?
What, in terms of, well, it's quick.
How many years? 243rd anniversary of our country this Thursday. So 7 more years, it'll be 250. That'll be exciting, right? Let's shoot for that.
We're going to schedule a show for that day? Or?
We will. We'll see. Everybody have a great week. Dan, I cannot thank you enough.
Sure you could.
For sitting in for Ed today and talking about...
there's no replacement for Ed at all. Certainly.
You're in his chair.
I'm in his chair very temporarily, and Ed can't be replaced, certainly, but, I sit here and try to just, make sure that there's still a show.
We're going to try to figure out how to Skype and incorporate that into our shows in the future, too. That's going to be... Unless there's some update to Skype, or unless Skype isn't even what people use anymore, maybe there's something else out there. But we'll explore it.
Yeah, well, I'm not even sure if Google Hangouts is still...
I know.
I should know if the Hangouts are live. It's actually my favorite, video conferencing alternative, but I haven't had need to use it, so... I think Skype is probably still it.
Okay.
Or FaceTime.
With that, have a good week.